Um, Good day or good morning to everyone joining us today. I'm really honored to be today to introduce the book that we're discussing today. The book called Decolonizing Central Asian International Relations Beyond Empires. And it's a book written by Professor Timur Dadabayev. And Timur Dadabaev is a professor at the University of Tsukuba, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And we will be joined by three discussants. Dr. Assel Tutumlu, she is assistant professor at Near East University and teaches political science and international relations. And we will be joined by political scientist, director of Caravan of Knowledge Institute, Farkhad Tolipov, and Dr. Erika Marat. She is an associate professor at National Defense University, also teaches international relations and some of the subjects related to Central Asia too. So really thanks to all of you for joining today and sharing this book, basically launching this book and also sharing your reflections on the book. So let's start. I'll first give the floor to Professor Timur Dadabaev for 5 minutes, kind of a very short presentation of the book, and then it will be followed by the discussion. Yeah. Okay.
So thank you very much for this opportunity and for this interest to discuss this book. I would like to take this opportunity to, in particular, thank Gulzat, Dr. Gulzat Botoeva for arranging and facilitating this important discussion, but also for initiating it. I would like to thank Dr. Erika Marat and Dr. Assel Tutumlu. And I'm in particular also thankful to Professor Farkhad Tolipov, who is the person who, that would not be exaggeration to say that, he was the first one to introduce myself and my colleagues to this notion of the Western international relations as a series, back in early 1990s. And, we've kept in touch after my graduation, and, he remains the source of inspiration for many of us in terms of ideas. And I'm very glad that, we can discuss this book together today. So I'm going to provide a very brief background about what this book is about and how it came into existence. The problem that this book attempts to deal with is very simple. The regions like Central Asia, they remain peripheral and marginal in constructing IR theories. Also frequently what we see in the works of students, but also scholars, is the dominance of the Western and Russian, cliches and images as we read, their findings, which reminds us of the dominance of Marxist ideological assumptions that we've seen, well, some of us, in 1980s when we read, the works of regional scholars at that time. And so that actually brings this, this image of coloniality of some kind. So to counter such studies, this particular book focuses on the notion of Central Asian agency in international relations and emphasizes the importance of equal treatment of such agency. Now, the natural question or, the statement would be, well, isn't it obvious that, the Central Asia needs to be treated equally? Well, it appears it's not, so I would like to introduce you to this, a few reviews, not of this book, but of another article that is coming in a couple of weeks. And so, I'll just give you the extract from it, So for reviewers, point of view of equal agency of Central Asia is not obvious. So the answer, one of the comments was, but is this true in reality, equality of Central Asia? Regardless of the author's desire to make the international relations more democratic, in reality, they are not. Instead, global politics is characterized by disparities of power, not only between the states, but between companies, charities, financial institutions, etc. There is a significant literature on how Russia retains influence in near abroad and emerging literature on the role of China in the region. While governments in Central Asia do have agency and have exercised it, but their agency and power to shape outcomes is less significant than the great powers. So, this is an unapologetic statement to say that Central Asia is less significant in its own region to shape its own policy, which is outrageous. And, this is coming from a proper journal, in Q1, level journal. Now, another sort of review for a different paper, also coming soon, luckily accepted, is, this one. It deals with this, the comment about contribution of Central Asia to regional IR. And it is questioned by reviewers, and one of the statements was this: you use the term West versus local. I take issue with this. It should be West versus non-West, and local is a subset of each of this. Generally, what is the role of tribal, local, administrative? You see, your point made to Central Asia also applies through Africa and much of Southeast Asia and Hispanic America. Could it be you're just simply trying to unseat the dominance in the literature of the larger nation states? So every time you're trying to peculiarize what, the meanings of, a particular concept in Central Asia or elsewhere, the treatment of this is simply taking it as an attempt to just, question the dominance of the literature, while, your intention is just to provide a better understanding of IR in a particular regional context. So in that particular sense, my book is to an extent a response to this kind of mindset, and to attempt to reject or downplay Central Asian agency by providing regional narratives and points of contestation when it comes to the dominant positivist rhetoric. And, what we need to make of it is not so, well, it is relevant to Central Asia in general, because we are all scholars of Central Asia, and we would be getting this kind of arguments and, reviews, as we go through a publishing process. But, the larger implication for the study of IR is that, mainstream IR, rarely initiates dialogue with, non-mainstream, non-positivist, non-Western scholars, because they don't have motivation to do so. And such dialogue, therefore, needs to have a non-Western perspective. It needs to be launched by non-Western perspective, and then interlocked with existing IR knowledge. So in that particular sense, I am far from thinking that we need to barricade, Central Asian studies for whatever. We just need to interlock what the Central Asian meanings with, Western advances of international relations. And only then we would be able to perhaps, go beyond this West, non-West distinction in order to arrive at this notion of global IR in line with what Acharya and Buzan and others, argue for. So this would be, my introductory, statement, that I will be looking forward for any further questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timur. I'll give the floor to Assel Tutumlu, Dr. Assel Tutumlu first. She is on the screen as Erika Marat. It's just a technical glitch. So don't think it's Erika Marat. It's Dr. Assel Tutumlu. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gulzat and everyone else. I'm very much grateful for the opportunity, and the reason why we are on the same screen, because Erika and I are actually in the same room, so we didn't want the microphones to be, overarching and making noise. But basically, while reading the book, it's a really, in my perspective, what Timur did in his book, he actually highlighted several issue areas where decolonization project is real. And in this sense, the book can be read as separate chapters by chapters, or it can be read in a kind of an overall overview of the dimensions where decolonizing frame is actually the most appropriate and visible. And in that sense, it was I was really amazed at the breadth and wealth, so to say, of the issue areas that you've selected, because we tend to read the books that will be on just one particular story, so to say. The dimensions are very much limited, and in your book you have so many things and so much wealth of information that goes into transportation projects, then goes into the Soviet past, goes into desecuritization of Afghanistan. I mean, there are so many really important issues that actually allow us to have the agency and to realize the agency, that it's not just about a kind of a realist understanding of, okay, agency of this God-forgotten Central Asia is limited, or if it exists, it's actually related only to this idea of balancing between great powers and so on. But to show the extent and the quality and to support all of this with data, to me was actually really amazing. I wanted to go through several themes that are actually important and then also pose some questions. So to me, as a political science scholar that studies authoritarian regimes, it was very interesting to see how you conceptualize decolonization, because decolonization frequently is considered to be a method of knowledge, a method of research methods, and it was very kind of an ontological and epistemological perspective. And the fact that for you locate your voice and the idea of decolonization in the agency of foreign policy of Central Asian states was really important, and made me also think about the nature of the authority in the region, about the nature of the regimes, particularly when you begin to really shift the perspective of regionalism itself, where you talk about the relationship between the Central Asian states as Kardashlik, right, as brotherhood, a very different idea of how these particular countries see each other. And I think from the very beginning, I really liked how you put it from the very beginning, that there is a very different perspective that needs to be done, that needs to be voiced out. Another thing that I actually very much admired is this idea of the Soviet past. And what's interesting, Timur, you actually really echo some of the research questions that I actually have, except that it took a lot longer for me to actually write it in written form, in academic form. But Sovietness is actually something that I'm also thinking, and the fact that you separated the idea of Sovietness from the perspective of grand narratives of the regime vis-a-vis the people was very striking to me, because we usually tend to identify Sovietness as Homo Sovieticus, as a kind of a Soviet person with a certain mentality, or we tend to identify Sovietness as a manipulation of propaganda created by the regimes. And the fact that you managed to actually explain this rift, so to say, the difference between the grand narratives and how people understand, in order to really explain why Sovietness still is something that evokes nostalgia, was very interesting. And I also like the fact that you've used the theories of nostalgia as well in order to bring this point. The second theme that I was also interested in, and you actually managed to write it in such a nice way, it's the idea of Silk Roads. And I think here it was one of the most interesting things to me, that Silk Roads is not just about what China wants to see in Central Asia, or what America wants to, or United States wants to see, or Russia, but you actually begin to really show that it's not just about that. It's about a certain amalgamation of different interests, including countries like South Korea, for example, Japan, European Union, including the regimes as well, that are creating certain programs, certain strategies, and there are certain agreements and money in it. And we need to understand foreign policy not necessarily as a kind of a top-down approach or the bottom-up approach, but as a matter of the kind of, it reminded me of a certain structuration process, that we take certain steps with certain interests, and what we get at the end is not necessarily a win-take, a zero-sum game, but it's actually a very much a process of a certain outcome with certain ideas in mind. Another thing that I wanted, and this is just the two things, because I know that Erika will probably talk more about security issues, but the idea of desecuritization. I was so amazed at how you, because it's for the first time I'm actually I'm exposed to this idea that the new approach to foreign policy of President Mirziyoyev in Uzbekistan represents a shift from Karimov's securitization policy to desecuritization. And it actually, it fits within my question that Nazarbayev has actually adopted this type of desecuritization for quite a while, right? Calling it a multivectoral policy. And what happened at the end is that we kind of created so to say, sectors of the economy, politics, and so on, where certain countries' interests were present and more dominant than others. I was wondering is whether or not you see similar things happening in Uzbekistan. Obviously, Kazakhstan had less actors involved. China, for example, would control would be very much in the United States, would be present in natural resources. Russia would be present in military affairs, and in Uzbekistan, it seems like it's a multilateral field it's genuinely multilateral. And the last thing that I would like, I really enjoyed reading the perspective of Afghanistan. That Afghanistan has been seen as a place of insecurity, and now it's Afghanistan is the land of opportunities. And I think this particular shift, explained from the decolonial perspective, offers a truly new, innovative approach to see that, and it requires a lot of development and analysis. And I'm really enjoying it. I want to see more work of yours on these particular topics. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Assel. I will give the floor to Professor Farkhad Tolipov now. I think probably it will be better, right, Timur, if we collect all the comments and reflections, and then you can answer the questions later on. Okay.
Sure. That's better. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Floor is yours. I just forgotten to say earlier that I will be checking the time, so I'm trying to keep it on time. And around 7 minutes, if you're going beyond, I will give those fanfare.
Okay, yeah, understand.
Thank you.
Actually, I try always to be punctual when I'm speaking, when I'm fixing an appointment, every time. So I appreciate punctuality of people. Okay, first of all, I would like to say that two comments or two remarks might have been done today in this discussion. And I would even limit myself to these two comments. I'm saying this by joking, but these two remarks are, first, that author of this book, Decolonization of Central Asia IR, had done a great job, really a great job. And his work is, without exaggeration, can be considered a significant contribution to the Central Asian scholarship. Indeed, he raised so many issues, so many questions related to Central Asian IR from theoretical perspective. That's why it is really, without exaggeration, again, I say a breakthrough in our overall attempt to study Central Asia, to explain Central Asia, to describe Central Asia from theoretical point of view. So this is really a great job. And second, maybe I should say that this work is not simply one of the many books, dozens and hundreds of books which are devoted to Central Asia, so it will be one of them. No, I think this book is, without exaggeration, again, a call for discussions. And author, Professor Dadabayev, several times in his book, reiterates one important idea, that there should be dialogue of different schools of thinking, positivist, non-positivist, constructivist, realist, and so on. Each school has its own strengths and weaknesses, advantages and disadvantages, but there is a very serious lack of such a dialogue between schools. I think this is a very important message, which we can deduce from reading this book. So dialogue is really lacked, and we have to be engaged in very intensive, very fundamental dialogue, because as I said, each school has its own advantages and disadvantages, especially when they are applied to a Central Asian context. Of course, as the previous speaker said, there were so many issues which Timur raised in his book. I will just maybe mention several just to illustrate how motivating this work is in terms of again inviting the dialogue, inviting overall discussion of different scholars. Some of his points are really harmonious to mine. We think in unison about Central Asia, and when we analyze and describe Central Asia, some points maybe caused my questions from my side. That's why I will ask Timur some questions also. Well, first of all, I fully share that the dominant approach to Central Asian scholarship in the world, not only in the West or in Russia, but also locally among Central Asians, is the state-centric approach. This is absolutely correct. Most of the scholars dealing with Central Asia, they have attitude based on state-centric approach. I don't know whether this is correct, the best approach or not, but the statement that this is the dominant approach is correct in my opinion, and it's dominating. Moreover, not only this approach, state-centric, and many others also, take for instance geopolitics or Russian influence or America or China, which Dadabayev also highlights quite accurately in his book. Also supported by locals. I mean, local aspirants who write their dissertations or write their articles are really carried away with this kind of approaches. They are really obsessed, I would say, with such rhetoric or such stereotypes that Russia is a dominant or hegemon in Central Asia, or there is a great game between Russia and and the United States, and so on and so on. This is a very accurate observation, in my opinion. This is true. So again, local scholars, also my colleagues from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, or Kyrgyzstan, do use such approach when they also try to analyze events in their own countries. The other maybe point which I would like to make, because of shortage of time, Timur several times criticized Western approach, the dominance of Western school of thinking when it's applied to Central Asian contexts. From this, I think the reader should understand that there should be something alternative. There should be something different. That local scholarship, local voices should be articulated well and expressed. And from this, my question could be: do we really should we really accept that the approach or the vision that there should definitely be alternative vision, alternative approach to Central Asian scholarship, Central Asian IR theory? In which aspects Western scholarship is wrong when Westerners analyze Central Asia? Why should we ignore or diminish the positivist approaches to Central Asia? Why are they not correct, or let's say, or limited in their capacity to describe events in Central Asia? Myself, I've published several articles about the adequacy or non-adequacy of Western approaches. Even I can proudly say that I discussed with Mr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, he died some time ago, about the irrelevance of his concept of balkanization of Central Asia. So his concept of balkanization actually was not just his own author's, let's say, approach to Central Asia. It was reflecting the dominant perception in the West of Central Asia, that Central Asia should be mired to different conflicts, based on religious convictions, or interethnic or border claims, or whatever. So Brzezinski just portrayed this picture as in terms of or using the term balkanization. But Actually, there is a widespread stereotype in the West that Central Asia is a conflict-prone region. And I myself criticized Brzezinski's approach of, or usage of this term of balkanization, and provided in the journal Central Asian Caucasus several counter arguments against this balkanization theory, if we can call it a theory. By the way, Hadershaw, in his turn, also pointed out to this paradox that despite this widespread stereotypical perception of Central Asia as conflict-prone region, especially based on conflicts based on religious Islamic, extremism, radicalization. Actually, all this period of independence didn't confirm such a vision that it should be mired in the extremism-related conflict. It didn't happen in Central Asia, except maybe some cases of terrorist attacks, no more. So Hadershaw also was one of the first Western scholars who pointed out to such a need to correct, let's say, the vision of Central Asia. Well, because of shortage of time, maybe I will also raise one question, or a couple of questions. I fully agree that, and also wrote my own pieces on this, that, as Timur said, pre-Soviet, Soviet, and post-Soviet realities should be equally considered in the overall researches related to Central Asia, because Central Asia is not just what appeared on the map of the world after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It still, is facing some remnants of the Soviet past, something what I personally call Soviet syndrome, and pre-Soviet realities which were revitalized right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Fully share this point that pre-Soviet, Soviet, and post-Soviet realities should be considered dialectically, maybe in conjunction with each other, and then we will maybe generate more adequate knowledge of Central Asia. Timur, I would also ask you maybe one question also related to Afghanistan. You said that the idea of decolonization of Central Asian IR is, this idea, this issue is identical or the same or similar what Afghanistan is facing. And the Afghanistan and Central Asia, or in particular Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, can cooperate in the overall decolonization endeavor. What did you mean by such, approach? I mean, whether, because recently the idea became so popular among Western scholars, especially with the initiative of Professor Frederick Starr, that Afghanistan is a part of Central Asia. Do you share this view that Afghanistan is a part of Central Asia, and both Afghanistan and Central Asian countries, or in particular Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, can go hand in hand in the overall decolonization, attempts, endeavors? I don't know how should we accept also the related concept of desecretization of Afghanistan in the given the fact of complete disaster in Afghanistan after the seizure of power by Taliban in August this year. Can we really desecuritize Afghanistan? That desecretization, as I understand this term, should mean the decrease of level of stress emanating from this from certain territory. Can we really anticipate the peaceful developments in in Afghanistan? And well, really, are there some real arguments to desecuritize Afghanistan and look at it not at the zone of conflict or zone of stress, but zone of opportunities? So this is just an open question. Anyway, I would raise more questions maybe during the discussion period. We will also discuss some other nuances, other aspects of this text, of this book. So, but maybe I will stop at this moment because I just, use more time than I was given. Anyway, Timur, congratulations with this great job. It's really a very significant contribution to the overall Central Asian scholarship. And I hope this work will be continued because of course this is not the end of the scholarship. It's a major step, major theoretical step in Central Asian scholarship, and maybe also we will do something together within this group, which we have today in this Zoom separately. Anyway, good luck in your future endeavor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Lots of questions. Erika, I will give the floor to Dr. Erika Marat now for her reflections and comments.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, first of all, Timur. Great book. And I think in addition to your personal achievement, this is actually an achievement for Central Asian studies as a field, because we finally are talking about the way we see our region, and we are actively confronting those dominant external notions of what is happening in the region by interpreting from our own positionality, being from the region and seeing and developments in the region and having personal and political connection to this geographic area. So I'd like to make 3 points in addition to what I said and Farkhad already said, because they really raised some excellent issues. 3 points that I particularly liked in your work. So first of all, the first point is I really liked how you characterized how Central Asian leaders communicate with each other. And to me, it was this notion that it is beyond what some external notions expect from regional integration. There is a certain yardstick to measuring what is really regional integration. There should be some kind of organization, there should be some kind of formal alliance so that we can speak of as regional cooperation. But what you point out is that there is a lot of informality going on between the leaders who are looking for similar goals. And this informality has been growing, this cooperation has been growing, and that is integration, that is cooperation. But that's something not visible and not noticed by some external observers who use their own measurements to what is regional integration. So I really loved it. And to me, that resonated with something what one of the Central Asian ambassadors recently told me in Washington, D.C., that there is a lot of, so in Washington, D.C. in general, there is a lot of credit taken for what is going on in Central Asia right now, the C+1 type of cooperation. Certain, State Department sees it as one of its achievements in Central Asia, that by promoting a 5+1, so 5 Central Asian states plus United States, that it created this ground for cooperation for Central Asian countries now, and they're now cooperating thanks to the initiatives from outside. I mean, there is something to that idea, of course, and the certain effort has been made by United States. But I think just what we're missing is the developments in Central Asia that made it possible, that there was a lot of internal developments that actually made a 5+1 possible. And the ambassador that I'm referencing, what he said was that what we need in Central Asia is just 5 without the +1. And those +1s is good. But the +1s, and the United States is not the only country that does the +1 thing. It's Japan that did it, EU that did it. The +1 usually necessarily looking for something for themselves as well. That it's not just for Central Asia, but it is for the external power as well. And what we need in Central Asia is actually just the 5. So that's one. So I really liked how you described this groundwork, the cooperation between Central Asian leaders. Second, I think this book finally goes beyond what we say, what agency is. So whenever we hear discussions of how Central Asia is not a playground, Central Asia is not a backyard, Central Asia is not sandwiched between the Central Asian countries actually have agency in deciding who they want to cooperate with. You actually broke down what this agency is, and especially with the case of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, you showed how leaders navigate this complex regional and international dynamics, and they pick and choose what is best for their country. So you really, and I really like how you explained what is EU, how Central Asia cooperates with EU, with Japan, with South Korea, beyond what we typically read as Russia, China, United States kind of narrative. And my final point is also has to do with Afghanistan. I really appreciated how you narrated how Uzbekistan was trying to broker or find its way to cooperate with Afghanistan even beyond the withdrawal, that there was an active engagement started a couple of years ago. And again, here you really do a great job demonstrating how complex those calculations were, that it's between security and economic cooperation, between politics, and at the same time trying to juggle international influences as well from China and Russia. So these are my 3 points. And in the interest of time, what I want to do is ask a question on my main question is, how do you think public opinion figures into how Central Asian leaders conduct their foreign policy? Do you think it's still something that is, so foreign policy is something that is generated at the very top level between presidents and their loyal supporters in the government? So on the elite level, or do you think that Central Asian leaders are now also more accountable to the public, and they consider what is in the interest of the public, and try to reflect what the public wants them to do? Okay, so these are my quick comments. Again, congratulations, fantastic work as always, and I hope that as Farkhad said, I hope that really that starts a bigger conversation on IR in Central Asia.
Thank you so much, Erica. We have, so now officially we have 20 minutes to answer the questions. I'm not sure, I don't know if you can go a little bit beyond, but we'll see. I think it will be good if you, Timur, can answer some of the questions, maybe not all of them.
Yes.
And if possible, if people are interested in asking the more questions, you can probably write them in the chat. So even though we might not have time to cover all of them, it will be really good probably for gathering them, and then maybe there will be another forum where Professor Dadabayev can answer them as well in a different kind of format. So if you have any question, you can put them in the chat. I'm talking to the audience as well, but I think now I'll give the floor to Timur. Yep.
Thank you very much to all the readers and the commentators. I really appreciated your support. Not so much because this work is, I've written it, but this is not the point of satisfaction that I have. It's the point that, that I was not entirely sure if these arguments that I was making are, resonate with scholars in the region. And, unless we have consolidated position on this issue, we would not be able to articulate what Central Asia stands for. And I think, that's what is important. And I think in that sense, I felt that we all share this concern for the dominance of the concepts and theoretical assumptions which do not necessarily belong to the region, or which do not fully explain what we see in the region. So in that case, I would really like to thank you. Now I will combine several questions so that we will have a little bit of time for the audience. Now, the first issue with decolonization, which Assel took up, thank you very much for bringing this up. This notion of how do we define decolonization, or the notion of being decolonized. In my own work, I don't sort of have this ambition to provide the full sort of all-encompassing definition of what decolonization means for Central Asia. But in my own work and in relation to the field of international relations, it refers to the silencing and ignoring of the local understanding of the concepts which are being sort of articulated, whether this is regionalism, whether this is interstate relations and stuff like that. So unpacking local perspective, is decolonization process. So it does not, as Professor Tolipov correctly mentioned, I do not call for domination of Central Asian notions, in IR, but Central Asian notions need to be delivered so that the dominant voices can be mixed, and maybe something in between can be produced, something which is relevant both to the region but also contribution to the wider body of the IR. So that's the point of decolonization that I mean. And so in that sense, it's decolonizing not in historical perspective, it's decolonizing in terms of mindset. And so I will, and Assel also mentioned this notion of multi-vectoral diplomacy. Yeah? And to be frank, I think even this notion needs to be, deconstructed, because we use it so often. But when I try to think of the country which does not employ multi-vectoral diplomacy, I would have very few, because all countries are trying to do this. And I think even this notion is being imported into our mindset. To demonstrate that we're open and we're sort of engaging with everyone. I think there needs to be an alternative perspective to this multi-vector diplomacy. I've mentioned this in chapter 2 of my book, that this calls for the critical deconstruction. Now, I'll move to Professor Tolipov's question. I really appreciated your point about that even local scholars quite often share the perspectives of positivists. And the very simple question would be, why? And it is because they don't have any other alternatives. In many cases, they read these things just like the Marxist dogmatic ideas that they were given. They were given in post sort of Soviet perspective, these ideas. So in order to publish and survive in this academic world, they sometimes accept these ideas and run with this. But my book actually is attempted as a wake-up call to this, or to all of us. I wouldn't say to them, but to all of us, to say, look, we need to think beyond it, beyond these ideas, because we have certain realities in Central Asia which do not necessarily fit the narrative which is given. This brings me to the second question that you asked me. So what is Central Asian international relations? How different it is, from conventional or from Western sort of positivist described, IR. My answer would be twofold. The first thing we need to establish what Central Asia is not, and I think this is the the coverage in chapter 2 that I give. Central Asia is not post-Soviet. Central Asia is not stam generalized. Central Asia is not rivalry driven. Central Asia is not transitional. Central Asia is not Westphalia based in terms of IR. Central Asia is not conquest sort of prone in terms of the great game narrative and stuff. So that's what Central Asia is not. That brings me to the question is, okay, so what is Central Asia? In my own research, I emphasize the notion of identity. I emphasize that Central Asian IR is identity-based and deeply socially constructed. And, this brings, these ideas of constructivism and stuff. But, what I'm trying to emphasize is that, the notions in positivism, which emphasize that international relations are the areas of the strategic realm, when, gains and losses are continuously and, strategically calculated by the states, and rivalry and dominance is the, the main criteria. These are not the notions that, we operate with in Central Asia. It's more related to the compromise, consensus building, and this is defined by geographic location, by historical influences of different powers, and by the mentality at the level of culture. The second point that I make about Central Asianness of regional IR, the IR in Central Asia is neighborhood driven. The notion of the neighborhood is very important. I've in a couple of weeks, there would be this article that I've developed when I argue that the notion of the national sovereignty needs to be reconsidered for Central Asia in favor of regional sovereignty or regional belonging, because in Central Asia, this is quite obvious that this can be operationalized, and what we see in the region. So this notion of neighborhood also relates to what Professor Tolipov's question about Afghanistan. You're right. that sometimes Afghanistan and Central Asia are considered to be, you know, some people argue it's one region, some people argue that it's not. But we all agree Afghanistan is a neighbor. And you know, in terms of the attitudes, in terms of political statements, all of them are in reference to the neighbors, because you know we cannot run from it. You know, we can securitize the discourse, but we cannot barricade ourselves. There is no way. So in that particular sense, you know, my argument that, you know, neighborhood remains one of the, you know, most important areas, issues. And you know, I have mentioned in the book, also in this theoretical chapter too, that you know this notion of Central Asian neighborhood is very different from the European neighborhood policy that, you know, they have. In Europe, you know, they have this policy to delimitate those who are inside EU and those who are outside. While in Central Asia, when we refer to neighbors, we refer to us, you know, the Central Asian us is defined by neighbor, and others like Russia and China, which are not necessarily neighbors. So that's the point. The third point is emerging neighborhood of, you know, first spirit and Central Asian norms. Now, you know, I get this question about, so what is Central Asian norms? You know, how do they sort of demonstrate themselves? And you know, in the book, I have outlined that, you know, these notions of brotherhood or Hardoshli or you know others that I referred to, as you know the notions of sharing, notions of the political elders, you know, notion of the consultative meetings. They are not all deeply rooted in the culture of the region, you know, even without, you know, institutions built, you know, these institutions of, you know, informal communication, they serve as the bridge, you know, for, you know, the communication. So in that particular sense, my sort of image of what Central Asia is that, you know, it's driven by identity, it's driven by the social construction, it's driven by the notions that, you know, that there is self and there is others, and the self is defined by the notions of neighborhood. And so, you know, the point about Afghanistan, I answered, you know, I don't have the position about whether Afghanistan needs to be treated as, you know, part of the region or not, because, well, it's a big question. But, you know, one thing, it's neighbor. Another, Afghanistan is also it is the outcome of the imperial powers, you know, be it Soviet imperial invasion or the American one, which we recently you know, seen. And Afghanistan also is the victim of being silenced. Really, no one knows what, you know, Afghanistan or, you know, the you know, Afghan public wants in terms of political development, because there is no opportunity. Now with Taliban, we don't know. Do we have to really consider them to be, you know, voices of Afghan people? Do we have to do? I mean, it's a big question. But, you know, what remains, you know, similar is that, you know, that we don't really have any Afghan position up until all the time. You know, Soviet invasion, post-Soviet, you know, it was always influenced by the, you know, outside powers and the narrative of what it wants. And the third point about the, you know, what Erica raised this question about public opinion. I think, you know, Professor Tolipov has written, you know, recently in Central Asia and Caucasus Analyst, you know, this article where he, on the one hand, emphasizes and, you know, evaluates this, you know, the process of regional building. But on the other hand, you know, he sees the next step as the, you know, the public support towards such kind of regionalization is very important issue. I stay close to this position. And so in my own sort of work, you know, I also emphasize this, and, you know, in the coming article, which I built on my findings here, I also emphasize that the point of securitization, you know, comes from the point that, you know, securitization is always defined by the leadership. And what leaders define as security threat is then conceptualized as the, you know, security threat for the country. So I think, you know, we need to move away from this. And I think the problem with this kind of attitude to securitization is because, you know, these leaders in the region, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, accepted the notion of the sovereignty through the Western, you know, sort of template. Sovereignty belonged to them, to the government. But, you know, in my own sort of treatment, sovereignty belongs to the people, and, you know, to the you know, to the populations of the country. And so I'm kind of glad that, you know, in Uzbekistan we see this you know, moves towards this understanding, and we see, you know, that, you know, this is being sort of influenced in other parts. And I just hope this is going to be sustained, you know, for the future. So these are just some, answers to the questions which have been raised. But I would be looking forward for any questions from the audience, if there are any.
Thank you so much. I think there is a question in the chat. I kind of feel it is something that you already answered, but maybe we should voice it as well. So it's a question from Ulukbek, Aziza Ulukbek, and it says, while decolonizing and by doing so, we try to go beyond the positivist theories, concepts to understand Central Asia. Okay, so what is beyond these theories and concepts? What alternatives, theories and concepts should be applied to understand Central Asia in future works to interpret the region? And then I think it goes, and there is another one, and does Central Asia exist? Why not considering Uzbekistan in the global world context? Why we need Central Asia concept at all? I have a feeling you already answered, but maybe you can give.
There's also a question from Assel Mirza. Yes.
I can't see it.
You can't see it, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So Assel is asking, so congratulations on the publication. And the question is, how did you solve the challenge of including the work of local scholars in local languages in your study, since decolonial theory calls for knowledge production through challenging the dominance of English language academia?
Shall I answer?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Ulukbek Azizov actually produced, and I reference his work, in this book, this notion that we need to move away from this the concept of Central Asia, because this concept is also artificially imposed on the region. It may be. I do not agree with this position, because I believe that there is this, as I've already said, there is this notion of identity and Central Asian norms which unite and form the approaches to the problem. Now, the concept of Middle Asia and Kazakhstan have been imposed. That I would agree. But the concept of Central Asia is actually the concept which is rooted in what this leadership, but also general public wants. So I would stand for the position that the Central Asia exists. And in terms of your question about what lies beyond positives, I think this is an excellent question. In my own sort of research in this work and in the coming works, I came up with these ideas that I've already shared. The identity, neighborhood, social construction, the elements that I will informal meetings, political elders. These are the notions that which are post-positivist. But that does not mean these are limited. It's just the invitation for our imagination to go beyond it. So I would really encourage Ulukbek, but also others to sort of engage into this. Looking into the concepts and issues, so that we can produce more concepts that we can discuss and then offer to the wider body of international relations theories in terms of inquiry. Now, the question about local languages, I think this is something very important. I know Erica is fearless fighter for the for the representation of those who are silenced, who are not represented in wider body of literature, and I completely support this. We had this session last month at the what was this I've forgotten this association.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in my own work I attempt to because I'm coming from Uzbek background, so I can access Uzbek and other regional languages to a certain extent, and of course we can operate with Russian in addition to English. But I think the problem here, the major problem is it's not the language, it's the concept. It's just like Professor Tolipov said. Many local scholars, they are fed these ideas, and they are grown on these ideas. So whatever languages you use, the concepts are going to be, in the same. So I still see this problem. And the second point that I would like to make is that, there are certain studies which are quite good, which are published in local languages in limited volumes. But unfortunately, because they're published in local languages, they are not disseminated properly. And, it would probably be a little bit strong to say that, sometimes when I read English language literature, I recognize ideas which are articulated in local academia long ago. And sometimes, it might be, something that I feel sort of subjectively, but, I feel that maybe, international sort of community of scholars sometimes borrows these ideas without proper referencing, because, these ideas intentionally or unintentionally, somehow inform their understanding. So, in that particular sense, the message that I have to the, our colleagues locally, to publish internationally, and I think Erica is doing a great job in sort of mentoring through the Twitter about how to write the proper articles and stuff like that. So to let your ideas known, to make your ideas known, but also to claim them, because quite often even our students they do not display a proper respect for local scholarship. And I think this is a big problem, because I think local attitudes, local concepts need to come first. They are the backbone of our understanding of what local international relations should be. Unfortunately, it's the other way around. We have Western understanding, we have English language literature, which tells the local scholars how they need to think about their region. And I think in that particular sense, it's not so different from the Marxist ideological concepts that we were fed throughout the Soviet history. And to be honest, I blame all of these people in the Soviet times who did not have courage to actually publish and write and voice their concern. And I blame ourselves that we consume this literature without proper critical engagement. So my message to everyone would be to not to be afraid, to critically engage, and probably that would lead to this process of wider sort of discussion at the international level. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. It was right at 10 o'clock. Thank you so much. I think it was really great discussion. I don't see any hands raised or any more questions in the chat. So I think we all can just say thank you. And congratulations again. I actually haven't finished reading the book myself, but I will. And the message that you sent, I think, to all of us and to early career researchers, it's amazing. And not only for IR specialists, yeah, all the social scientists and humanities people. Yeah, thank you so much.
Just
Thank you.
Couple of seconds, Timur.
Yep.
Just
Yes,
a couple
go
of
ahead.
seconds. Can I recommend this book as a reading material to my students, or it's early because it's not yet published, right?
No, it's published now.